In the land of the Xia Kingdom, every human being is born with what is known as a resonance, either to a specific element or a powerful, mythical beast. Unfortunately, Lai Luo was born with an incredibly rare condition known as a blank resonance, as the name suggests. He doesn't have one. Normally, this would be utterly crippling, but at least he has the advantage of being the young master of the mighty House Lulan, one of the 5 great houses of Xia. Unfortunately, his parents, the powerful masters of House Lulan, have gone missing for many years, and the other great houses are beginning to eye their holdings quite hungrily. For that matter, plenty are also eyeing his talented, beautiful childhood friend and fiancé Zhang King, who has been leading House Lulan in his parents' stead. Lai Luo would much rather keep a low profile and wants to call off the engagement, but Zhang King has flatly refused. What's a useless young master to do? Is there any way he can get out of this engagement? Can he figure out a way to protect his house from the jackals circling around it? And is a blank resonance really useless? Chapter 1. I have 3 blank palaces. The Xia Kingdom. Jianshu Province. The June sun was blazing, scorching the city of Southwind with its heat. Many youthful faces could be seen within a bright, spacious training area of the Southwind Academy. The young boys and girls were all dressed in training gear and were seated in the lotus position. They were arranged in a circle, and their gazes were directed towards the center, where 2 figures were engaged in a rapid-fire duel. Clear ringing sounds could be heard echoing throughout the training area each time their wooden swords clashed. Both of the duelists were young, roughly 15 or 16 years of age. The youth to the right was quite slender and handsome, with a pair of lively eyes and an elegant demeanor. His spectacular leather clothes alone drew the rapt, bashful gazes of quite a few of the maidens present. Go, Lai Luo! A particularly brave maiden let out a cheer of support. Lai Luo's opponent was another youth, but a much more muscular one. His face looked significantly more brutish, and his skin was swarthy and dark. The duel between him and Lai Luo almost looked like a battle between a man and a black bear. When he heard the maiden cheer for Lai Luo, he grimaced in a rather jealous manner, then roared out, "Lai Luo, I'm not going to hold back any longer." He took a step forward, causing the floorboard to tremble, then chopped out with his wooden sword towards Lai Luo. The sword seemed to screech as it sliced through the air. Lai Luo's gaze flickered as he saw the shadow of the sword reaching towards him. He suddenly leapt forwards, moving as agilely as a swallow as he sidestepped this fierce, ponderous strike. The Windsboro Step, someone cried out with a hint of praise. The Windsboro Step was just a basic resonance art which quite a few of the people present knew, but not many were able to execute it with Lai Luo's level of skill. Lai Luo shot towards the muscular youth like a flying sparrow, then suddenly struck out in a move akin to drawing the sword. A ray of light seemed to flash with incredible speed as his sword pierced towards his opponent's chest. "The lesser nimble light sword," another called out in surprise. Lai Luo's strike had flashed forward like the curved horns of an antelope, an attack that was both fast and vicious. The onlookers couldn't help but sigh in praise. The most talented student of the Southwind Academy truly lives up to his reputation. The look on the muscular youth's face changed when he saw Lai Luo strike at him. However, he was no pushover himself. At this critical moment, he forcefully stabilized himself and then rapidly leapt several steps backwards. Right at this moment, a faint silvery glow exuded from his hand, seeming to take the form of a blurry silver bear's palm as he grasped the wooden sword. Accompanying the glow was a faint, deep, bear-like growl that seemed to emanate from somewhere within the muscular youth's body. One of the many watching students let out a surprised cry. "That's Zhao Qiuo's 5th grade silver bear resonance. It seems he's really taking this seriously." Accompanied by many amazed cries, Zhao Qiuo took a step forwards, causing cracks to appear in the floorboards beneath him as he delivered a chopping blow towards Lai Luo. His heavy wooden sword was filled with an aura of dominating power and accompanied by an ear-piercing gust of wind, and a rapid silver glow was quickly coalescing atop the sword as well. "Brutal chop!" the muscular youth roared out, delivering a brilliant blow directly against the incoming piercing sword shadow. Boom! The 2 swords slammed into each other with such tremendous force that Lai Luo's wooden sword started to crumble into pieces. In the end, the entire wooden sword was blown apart by the forceful, dominating, grisly-like strike. Faced with this tremendous power, Lai Luo was knocked dozens of steps backwards. After stabilizing himself, Lai Luo lowered his head to glance at the remnants of his wooden sword, then let out a helpless chuckle. "Fine, Zhao Qiuo, you win. Awa. This regretful sound simultaneously came from the mouths of multiple maidens as they heard his pronouncement. However, many of the young men watching let out little sniggers of joy. As lusty young men in the prime of their health, they naturally felt quite a bit of jealousy towards Lai Luo, due to the amount of affection the young maidens present bore him. What a pity! Lai Luo's attack was clearly deadlier. He's considerably superior to Zhao Qiuo when it comes to applying resonance arts. If it wasn't for the fact that he has yet to awaken a resonance, he definitely would have won this duel, an onlooker evaluated. Agreed. Zhao Qiuo has a 5th grade silver bear resonance that grants him astonishing power. In addition, I suspect his resonant power has reached the 5th seal as well. He lives up to his reputation as the strongest member of the second school. Lai Luo is definitely incredibly talented in learning and using resonance arts, but he was born without a resonance of his own. This is an incurable weakness. No matter how skilled you are in applying and using a resonance art, your attacks won't be of much use if you don't have sufficiently powerful base of resonant power supporting it. Ha! No need for you to pity him. Think about who Lai Luo is. He's the young lord of House Lulan, one of the 4 great houses of the Xia kingdom. His parents, in turn, were the youngest dukes in the kingdom. In 10 short years, their newly established House Lulan quickly ascended to become one of the 4 great houses. Not only are they famous in the Xia kingdom, they've even earned a reputation beyond our borders. Ugh, all that is ancient history. 3 years ago, his parents went missing during the Nobles' War, and ever since then House Lulan has grown much weaker. And, from what I've heard, there's currently a lot of dissent within House Lulan itself. In the future, it might even break apart. I doubt he'll be the young lord for much longer. Oh, is that really true? The current leader of House Lulan is Zhong King, right? One of our senior classmates. When this name came out, ardent looks appeared in the eyes of all the young men present. This was because the name Zhong King had reached mythical status in the annals of the Southwind Academy. Still, when they remembered the special relationship she had with Lai Luo, the ardent looks transformed into gazes aimed at Lai Luo that were rather odd. As the young men and women present all whispered and gossiped with each other, Zhao Qiuo walked towards Lai Luo, then patted him on the shoulder. Smiling, he said, "You all right? Don't blame me for seizing an unfair advantage." Lai Luo chuckled. Zhao Qiuo was the straightforward sort, and the two of them were usually on quite good terms. The man hadn't broken any rules either. The fact that he was born with a blank resonance was his greatest weakness. He couldn't blame Zhao Qiuo for that. A middle-aged man had been watching the two of them from the sidelines for quite some time. Finally, he turned his gaze away. This man's name was Zhu Shanyu, and he was the teacher of the second school. Zhu Shanyu's eyes were also filled with a lot of regret. Lai Luo truly was an incredibly talented figure, and he was able to learn any resonance art faster than an average person. In this, he had clearly taken after his 2 incredible parents, and in fact he actually surpassed them. Unfortunately, the fact that he was born with a blank resonance would prove quite problematic for him when it came to improving his resonant power. When humans trained, they had to rely upon their own resonance and use it as their foundations. They would use their resonances to draw upon the natural energy of the world, then convert it into the force known as power. There were countless different types of resonances, but most could be roughly divided into one of 2 camps: elemental resonances and beast resonances. Elemental resonances referred to the various elements that filled heaven and earth, such as water, fire, wind, or thunder. As for the beast resonances, according to the legends, during the earliest dawn of human civilization, there was an almighty figure that attempted to strengthen humanity by extracting the spirits of countless beasts, then infusing these spirits into the various human bloodlines, giving birth to what was now called beast resonances. In general, both elemental resonances and beast resonances could be roughly divided into 9 different grades. Normally, when a human child reached his teens, a cavity known as the resonant palace would appear within that child's body. Once it manifested, it would naturally give birth to that child's resonance. Zhao Qiuo, for example, had awakened a 5th grade silver bear resonance within his resonant palace. This obviously was one of the many beast resonances. This resonance specialized in granting tremendous strength, and when combined with his own formidable resonant power, it was capable of unleashing truly destructive levels of power. And this was where Lai Luo's problem lay. Even though his resonant palace had appeared, no resonance had manifested within the palace. It was completely empty. Cases like this were incredibly rare and were generally referred to as having a blank resonance. Since he had no resonance to serve as a foundation for drawing and refining energy from the natural world, it was very difficult for him to gain a high level of resonant power. This was the fundamental reason why he had just been defeated by Zhao Kuo. He had no resonance within his palace. The Academy had already performed many different tests to understand why this was the case. His parents were both outstanding figures, after all, and the high-level members of the Academy had very high hopes for him. They had initially believed that in the future, he would definitely be able to gain entrance into the best high-level academy of the Xia Kingdom, the Astral Sage College. When Lai Luo had first entered the Southwind Academy, he had lived up to their expectations, demonstrating an absolutely astonishing aptitude for training in resonance arts. He had been immediately granted entrance into its first school, where all the most talented students of the entire Chanshu province were gathered. Alas, as time advanced and as all the students began to manifest their resonances, his current problem had reared its ugly head. By now, he was the only one with a resonant palace, but nothing inside it. As a result, although he was always faster to learn new arts than the other students, his resonant power grew at a much slower rate. By now, his resonant power had actually fallen to be below the average for the first academy. The whole point of learning resonance arts was to be able to apply your resonant power to greater effect. But if your resonant power was weak to begin with, well, there was a limit to what even the most profound of resonant arts could achieve. After subjecting Lai Luo to a battery of tests, the administrators had come to the conclusion that Lai Luo's body simply, innately, lacked any resonance at all. In the future, it would be incredibly difficult for him to advance in his cultivation. After they reached this conclusion, the resonance instructor of the first school immediately requested that Lai Luo be removed from the first school and sent to the second school. To be fair, this made sense. The first school was the place where all the most talented students were gathered, and the teacher simply didn't want Lai Luo to hold the others back. But of course, the other, more important reason was that right at that time, both of Lai Luo's parents had vanished. With them gone, House Lulan had quickly become the weakest of the four great houses. Their position was now quite awkward. And so, in the end, Lai Luo had been sent to the second school. Zhu Shanyu sighed to himself. When Lai Luo had first arrived at the second school, Zhao Kuo wasn't even a match for him. Now, a mere semester later, Zhao Kuo was able to overwhelm him. If this continued, his ranking within the second school would most likely continue to drop over the course of the next semester. Unless he was able to dramatically improve his performance, it was likely that he would stand no chance at all of being granted entry into the Astral Sage College. The more Zhu Shanyu looked at Lai Luo's calm, handsome features and his suave demeanor, the more pity he felt. He knew that the youth was incredibly hardworking, but his parents were simply so spectacular that everyone had incredible expectations for him. As a result, their prestige had become a source of tremendous pressure. Everyone knew the saying that talented parents often had useless children, but few would delve deeper into the reasons behind this. Lai Luo cast a glance at the many pitying gazes aimed at him, swept the splinters off his clothes, then sat down cross-legged. He knew exactly what all of them were thinking, of course. A blank resonance, eh? This pretty much guaranteed that his future prospects were dim. But Lai Luo smirked slightly. He couldn't help but unconsciously reach down to touch his lower abdomen. He had a secret which no one else knew. In his resonant palace, there was more than just a so-called blank resonance. For cultivators of this world, at first their bodies would give birth to a single resonant palace. Only later, when they reached the Duke stage, would they gain a second resonant palace. Finally, upon reaching the King stage, they would gain a third. However, the number of dukes in the Xia Kingdom could be counted on one hand, while kings were virtually unheard of despite how powerful the Xia Kingdom was. But of course, there were no absolutes. Supposedly, there were some especially blessed individuals who had a chance of gaining a second resonant palace even before they reached the Duke stage. This happened naturally as their resonant power advanced, but the chances were incredibly low. And this was what made Lai Luo special. Although he was still at the earliest 10 seal stage, he didn't have just one resonant palace in his body, he had three, which was completely unheard of. Normally, only supreme experts who had reached the King stage would have 3 resonant palaces, but somehow this had manifested within his body. But what was even more shocking was that all 3 palaces were blank. Having a blank resonance meant your future prospects were dim. But 3 blank resonances, did that mean you had a future, or not? Lai Luo let out a sigh, a rather depressed look on his face. Just as Lai Luo was feeling all these mixed emotions, Zhao Qiuo came over and sat down next to him. Zhao Qiuo whispered, "You still haven't resolved your resonance problem, eh?" Lai Luo silently shook his head. Upon seeing this, Zhao Qiuo let out a helpless sigh as well. Actually, he knew that this was a dumb question. A person was born with a resonance. It was innate, and no one had ever heard of someone later filling in a blank palace with something else. Clearly, Lai Luo was facing a serious problem. As the two chatted, Zhu Shanyu walked into the dueling grounds. After giving Lai Luo a few words of encouragement, he turned and said to the many students present, "Everyone, important exams will be starting next month. Your chances at entering a college will be dependent on your performance in the exams. I urge you all to train hard." The students were all silent, and they all had solemn looks on their faces. All their years of hard work were focused towards the exams coming up next month. If they were able to get into a college, then their future prospects would improve dramatically. After this, Zhu Shanyu announced that class was over. Lai Luo and Zhao Qiuo walked side by side as they left alongside the other students. "I'm going to spend some more time training my resonance arts. Honestly, you gave me a good scare today. I suspect that if your resonant power was just slightly higher, you'd beat the pants off of me," Zhao Qiuo said with a sigh after exiting the training grounds. He then waved goodbye towards Lai Luo. Lai Luo smiled as he watched Zhao Qiuo depart. He knew the truth. Zhao Qiuo was afraid that Lai Luo was in poor spirits after this defeat, and so wanted to give him some alone time. What Zhao Qiuo didn't understand was that by now, Lai Luo had grown accustomed to it all. Lai Luo withdrew his gaze, then turned and followed a tree-lined road that led outside the academy. He ran into quite a few students as he walked, and all of them, both male and female, would glance at him as they passed. It wasn't just because of his good looks. Rather, it was because he was now a rather notorious figure at the academy. In the face of their gazes, Lai Luo maintained a look of practiced indifference. He continued to follow the pathway until he reached the academy gates, at which point he paused. In front of him was a large number of students who were all speaking in a lively manner. These students were all surrounding a very special bluestone wall, the Southwind Academy's Wall of Honor. It contained the descriptions of all the mighty figures who had once graduated from the Southwind Academy. By now, all the students had seen the Wall of Honor countless times. Logically speaking, they should have grown weary of examining it long ago, but for some reason they were quite focused on it today. Lai Luo pursed his lips. He knew what was going on. The vast majority of the students here were because of her. Lai Luo turned his gaze to a very specific point on the Wall of Honor. There was a gleaming crystal at that point, emanating rays of light that slowly coalesced into a tall, willow, and almost lifelike figure. The figure was that of a girl. She was dressed in the school uniform of Southwind Academy, a light blue cape, a simple white tunic, and a short black dress. She had a pair of long, dainty legs that were perfectly white and pleasing to the eye. Her facial features were similar exquisite. She had an elegant, raised nose, long and thick lashes, and snow-white skin. All of these were quite mesmerizing to behold, but it was her eyes that truly engraved her in everyone's mind. Her pupils were golden, and they emanated an ineffable feeling of purity. If you stared into them long enough, you would begin to feel a sense of pressure. Her gaze was rather cool, and she stared straight ahead, with one hand on her slender hips and the other resting on the hilt of a heavy sword. Any who saw her would instantly feel a sensation of heroic, fierce majesty emanating from her. She truly was a soul-stirring girl, in terms of both appearance and demeanor. The wall behind her projection held her name, John King. She was one of the dazzling star graduates of the Southwind Academy, born with a 9th-grade light resonance and enough talent to cause the countless people of the Xia Kingdom to sigh in amazement. After spending just 2 years in the academy, she had been immediately recruited by the Astral Sage College, even though she had yet to take her graduation exams. In the past 100 years, she was the only person in Tianshu province to receive such an honor. By now, she was a legend of the Southwind Academy, and the many students who had enrolled after her practically worshipped the ground she walked on. In fact, she was now incredibly famous throughout the entirety of the Xia Kingdom. Lai Luo stared at the projection of Zhang King in a daze for a few moments, before noticing that quite a few gazes had turned towards him. Those gazes were filled with a look of resentment, envy, and puzzlement. Lai Luo maintained his look of practiced indifference. He knew exactly why they were staring at him like that. It was because Zhang King, venerated almost like a goddess by both the male and female students of the Southwind Academy, had two other statuses. She had been trained by his parents since she was young, and she was his betrothed. Or, to put it another way, she was his fiancée. Chapter 2. A fiancé who doesn't want an annulment. As far as Lai Luo could recall, the first time he met Zhang King was when he was 3. His parents had just returned from a long journey, and on their return they had brought back the 5-year-old Zhang King. Later on, they had accepted her as their disciple. From a certain perspective, it could be said that the two of them truly were inseparable childhood friends, and his parents had truly doted on her as well. Unfortunately, ever since they were young, the relationship between the two was rather complicated. Zhang King was simply too outstanding, even as a child, and she was also 2 years older than Lai Luo. Whenever they fought as children, the end result was invariably Zhang King beating the snot out of him in a calm manner until he submitted. Honestly, it was a friggin' nightmare. As for the reason why she became his fiancée, supposedly, when she was roughly 10 or so years old, Lai Luo's father had commented in a drunken stupor that it would be wonderful if she one day became his daughter-in-law. The very next day, the 10-year-old Zhang King had personally written up a marriage contract and handed it over to Lai Luo's speechless father. That night, Lai Luo's old man had almost been beaten senseless by Lai Luo's enraged mother. Worse, Lai Luo had been watching and laughing at all of this, and as a result his mother had spanked the crap out of him as well. Lai Luo's mother had asked Zhang King to annul the marriage contract. Unexpectedly, she put on a rare show of absolute stubbornness. Without saying a word, she simply knelt down before Lai Luo's mother and father and refused to rise. In the end, Lai Luo's mother and father had no choice but to accede to her request. However, after doing so, they secreted away the marriage contract and never raised the topic again, pretending as though it had never existed. As time had passed, nothing further was said on the matter. Everyone, even Lai Luo himself, had long since forgotten about it. However, one day when Zhang King was at the Southwind Academy, she told a particularly determined suitor that she and Lai Luo had long ago betrothed to each other. This news had stunned the entire academy. No, it had shocked the entire Chanshu province. Thankfully, at that time Lai Luo had yet to enter the Southwind Academy. Otherwise, if he had, he would have instantly become an absolute pariah. Even now, after the passage of so many years, Lai Luo was still somewhat affected by the aftershocks of that announcement. From this, he keenly understood just how charismatic a figure Zhang King was. "Pops, you really screwed me over," Lai Luo silently mumbled to himself. "Yo, Lai Luo, why do you pause here every day? Are you enjoying the envious gazes of the crowds?" Just as Lai Luo was sighing to himself, a girl's voice suddenly rang out from behind him. Lai Luo turned, only to see an attractive young maiden standing behind him. Her hair was waist-long, and although she wasn't quite up to par with Zhang King, she was definitely a natural beauty. The skin-tight school uniform she wore accentuated her lovely curves quite nicely. At this moment, the young maiden was standing with arms folded across her chest, a rather mocking look on her face. Despite that, a calm look was on Lai Luo's face when he saw her. This was Difa King, one of his classmates. She was considered a beautiful golden flower of the Southwind Academy, and came from the Difa clan, one of the 3 great clans of the Chanshu province. She didn't have anything against Lai Luo. However, she was a die-hard fan of Zhang King, the extremely overzealous, almost obsessive type of die-hard fan. In her eyes, Zhang King was as beautiful, flawless, and perfect as an immortal fairy. There was no man in this world who was worthy of her, and of course, that included Lai Luo as well. Even though Difa King agreed that Lai Luo was an exceedingly handsome fellow, she also felt that looks were superficial. Someone worthy of Zhang King had to be a dragon amongst men, both internally and externally. Lai Luo, however, had only won a marriage contract with her thanks to his parents. In Difa King's eyes, this was an absolute blemish on her goddess honor. And so, ever since Lai Luo had joined the Southwind Academy, whenever Difa King saw him, she would first commence with a barrage of mocking words. After that, a series of endless questions. "Lai Luo, when are you going to annul the marriage contract between yourself and elder sister Zhang?" Right on cue. She had repeated this question countless times by now. Even Lai Luo couldn't help but rub the bridge of his nose before responding irritably, "None of your damn business." He then turned and left. A look of anger instantly appeared on Difa King's face. She stubbornly followed behind him. Lai Luo, do you really want to be the proverbial toad that lusts after a swan? Lai Luo, however, simply continued to ignore her completely. This just further enraged her to the point where her veins started to pop out. She sped up her footsteps to chase him down, then continued. Lai Luo, if you refuse to annul the wedding contract, the only one who's going to be in trouble is you. The more talented elder sister Zhang is, the more trouble you'll be in. Your parents have been missing for years now, and even House Lulan itself is at the verge of collapse. Your status as the young lord of the house isn't going to be able to shield you for much longer. You have no idea how many incredibly talented young men of Xia, all of whom have powerful backgrounds, are all smitten by her. Just because your parents treated her well, doesn't mean you can force her to repay you like this. Lai Luo, if you refuse to annul the marriage contract with her, even here in the academy there will be people who will cause you trouble. Finally, Lai Luo came to a halt. Oh, and who might that be? Difa King let out a light snort. I imagine you know who Bei Kun of the Bei clan is. Yes. He's already made it known that he hopes you will not rely on your status to force yourself on elder sister Zhang. He's also requested that you have a small meeting with him at the Clearwind in 2 days. Lai Luo chuckled. I'm familiar with him. Yes. In the past, he always liked to fawn over me. When his parents were still around, House Lulan's words held almost as much weight as that of the governor of Chanshu province. Bei Kun had often paid visits to Lai Luo and professed his undying friendship. Who would have thought that a few scant years later, House Lulan's situation would have completely changed, and this former friend of his would now come and cause him trouble. In the past, Bei Kun's favorite pastime was to put on banquets at the Clearwind Hotel, and he often would issue warm invitations to Lai Luo. Now, he was proposing a hostile rendezvous. The man was straightforward enough. Difa King said, Lai Luo, there's no need for you to mock him. This is how the world is. When your clan is powerful, many will toady up to you. Now that House Lulan has weakened, why should others give you any face? Even in the past, the ones they were giving face to were your parents, not you. Lai Luo nodded in agreement. I quite agree with what you said. During the course of the past 2 years, Lai Luo had quickly come to learn just how fickle fortune and friendship could be. Thus, he said nothing else and instead sped up as he departed the academy. However, Difa King followed after him. She was seemingly unwilling to just let this rest, and continued yammering nonstop. Every single thing she said was aimed at one thing, that Lai Luo should be willing to give Zhang King her freedom. By now, Lai Luo knew that the best way to deal with this type of person was to completely ignore her, and so he didn't pay attention to a single word she said. Finally, after passing through a series of hallways, he exited the academy. As he did so, he suddenly noticed that the ambient noise level seemed to have dropped dramatically. Even the mosquito-like buzzing of Difa King seemed to have come to a halt, as though she had a frog in her throat. Lai Luo turned to glance at her, only to see that her face was bright red. A look of excitement was in her eyes as she stared at the stone stairway outside the academy. Suspecting what was going on, Lai Luo followed her gaze, only to see that a carriage was parked before the stairway. The carriage had an antique, noble design and was quite spacious. It had 4 pure red wheels and was pulled by a muscular lion horse. At the front of the carriage was a very familiar insignia, the House Lulan insignia. As for the reason why Difa King's face was crimson, and all the nearby students had looks of excitement on their faces, it naturally wasn't just because of the House Lulan carriage itself, rather. It was the young woman standing in front of the carriage. The young woman had her hair in a casual ponytail, and her features were both exquisite while graceful. Her skin shone beneath the rays of the setting sun. She was dressed in a short blue cape, held a thin whip, and wore a short war skirt. Beneath the war skirt was a pair of mouth-watering slim white legs, but most eye-catching of all was her pure, lustrous golden pupilled eyes that shone like the sun. It was Zhang King. A series of murmurs began to arise from outside the academy. Countless students were staring at her slender figure. They never would have imagined that on this day they would have the chance to see in person this legendary graduate of the Southwind Academy. Lai Luo passed through the murmuring, excited crowd as he walked down the steps, then moved next to Zhang King. Rather surprised, he said, Sister King, when did you return to Southwind City? Although House Lulan had arisen in Southwind, after becoming one of the 4 great houses of the Xia Kingdom, it had already shifted its headquarters to the capital of the Xia Kingdom, the city of Xia. After Zhang King had been admitted into the Astral Sage College, the most supreme college of the Xia Kingdom, She too had moved to Zia City. Over the past 2 years, she had also been consumed with affairs regarding the management of House Lulan, and so it was quite rare for her to return to Southwind. It had been quite some time since even Lai Luo had seen her. John King glanced at him, then said in a calm voice, "Tomorrow is your 17th birthday. In addition, House Lulan has some important business to be discussed here. I just arrived at Southwind today, so I thought I'd come pick you up and take you home." Her voice was extremely pleasing to hear. It was both crisp and calm, like water from a deep mountain spring that was falling upon jade. Lai Luo nodded. The attitude that Zhang King was displaying didn't surprise him in the slightest. He had known her for ages now. This was just how her personality was. "Let's go, then," he said. Zhang King was simply too popular here at Southwind Academy. Just by standing here, she had become the focal attention of the entire area. He himself felt as though everyone was staring daggers at him. Zhang King nodded slightly, but she didn't immediately turn back. Instead, she looked at the excited Difa King, who was standing right behind Lai Luo. "Your name is Difa King, yes?" Difa King nodded repeatedly, her face ruddy from excitement. "You actually still remember me, elder sister Zhang?" Zhang King said quietly. "I hope you won't bother Lai Luo anymore. Otherwise, I will probably have to take extremely good care of your elder brother at the Astral Sage College." The look of excitement on Difa King's face instantly froze. A long moment later, transfixed by Zhang King's golden gaze, she nervously nodded. She no longer displayed any of the earlier confidence and arrogance that she had shown before Lai Luo. After speaking, Zhang King turned and entered the carriage alongside Lai Luo, her blue cape flapping slightly. Moments later, the lion horse let out a long bellow before it carried them away through the mist. As for Difa King, she just stood there and watched the carriage depart. A long while later, she finally rubbed her eyes, an intoxicated look on her face. "Elder sister Zhang, she's so cool. I absolutely adore her." Chapter 3. Lai Luo wants an annulment. The lion horse rapidly galloped through the wide streets of Southwind City. It pulled the carriage behind it in a stable yet fast manner, causing the forest of buildings to rapidly disappear. The inside of the carriage was quite spacious, and the temperature was quite comfortable. Lai Luo and Zhang King were seated facing each other, with a small tea table between them. The two didn't exchange many words. Lai Luo just sat there calmly with his eyes closed, while Zhang King had opened up a book and was intently reading it. A ray of sunlight shone into the carriage from a crack in the curtains, falling upon Zhang King's exquisite jade features and giving her an almost crystalline, translucent complexion. After a long period of silence, Zhang King blinked her long lashes, lifted up her slender face, then stared intently at Lai Luo with her golden eyes. "It seems the words I spoke at Southwind Academy all those years ago have caused you some trouble. I'm very sorry about that." Lai Luo remained silent, but he opened his eyes. He looked back at her, noting her exquisite features as well as her aura of strength and fierceness, then chuckled. "I don't see any sincerity in this apology. If you are sincere, then let me cancel our engagement." Zhang King flipped through a few more pages. "Is this the legendary annulment request? But according to the way the script is supposed to play out, I should be the one making this request. Have you perhaps gotten things backwards?" Lai Luo was caught off guard by her sudden display of deadpan humor. For a moment, he didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Zhang King raised her head and cast him a glance, then said calmly, "What's the problem? Are you afraid that our engagement will cause you even more problems in the future?" Lai Luo was silent for a moment, then shook his head. "I'm worried that I would be holding you back. There's no reason for a girl like you to be burdened by an unnecessary engagement. And while we are on this topic, do you know how many times my old man got his ass kicked by my mom because of this engagement? Now, I personally supported her kicking his ass for him coming up with such a stupid idea. But the real problem was each time, after she finished kicking his ass, I would get my ass kicked as well." A resentful look appeared in Lai Luo's eyes as he discussed this. As for Zhang King, when she thought back to how that normally gentle and refined woman had repeatedly given drubbings to both Lai Luo and his father for her sake, her small red lips couldn't help but quiver in amusement. Afterwards, she calmed back down and shook her head. "I'm not worried." Lai Luo felt a headache coming. "Then what if you fall for someone else in the future? This is absolutely ridiculous, you know?" Zhang King smiled calmly. "I might not meet such a person. I'm quite picky, you know." And now that the two of us are engaged, there's no way I'd give my heart to another. Lai Luo stared hard at Zhang King. Suddenly, a hint of anger entered his voice. Zhang King, what the hell are you thinking? I know my parents treated you well, and you are very grateful towards them, but there's no need for you to express your gratitude this way. What the hell do you take me for? A tool for you to show gratitude. You might have agreed to this engagement, but I never did. Lai Luo's sudden show of anger startled her. She stared pensively at him with her pure golden eyes for a long, silent moment, then lowered her head slightly. I apologize. I admit that I didn't take your feelings into consideration. Seeing this, Lai Luo pressed the advantage. If that's the case, then we should. However, Zhang King raised her head again, then stared at Lai Luo intently. You know what the rules of our house are. If two house members are unable to come to an agreement, then the only way to resolve it is through a duel. The winner gets to make the final decision. This was a rule which Lai Luo's mother had laid down, and it was applicable to any household disagreements whatsoever. Thus, every time she and Lai Luo's father had gotten into an argument, she would roll up her sleeves and then drag the old man into the training grounds to fight it out. If you truly are completely unwilling to be engaged to me, then we can go to the family training grounds and then resolve it in accordance with our house rules, Zhang King said. Lai Luo's face turned comically stiff for a moment, before a variety of expressions flashed through it. Finally, he gritted his teeth, pointed at her, and said furiously, Zhang King, you go too far. I'm still in the early stages of the 10 seals. How the hell am I supposed to fight against you, an earth fiend? Human cultivators, after establishing their resonant palace, were considered to have entered the most rudimentary stage, the 10 seal stage. After this came the resonant master stage, at which point they could be considered to have truly embarked into the path of cultivation. There were 3 primary levels to the resonant master stage: general, duke, and king. Putting aside the latter 2 stages for now, the general level itself also consisted of 2 sub-levels. The upper level was known as the Heavenly Dipper General, while the lower sub-level was known as the Earth Fiend General. As for Zhang King, she was already at the Earth Fiend General level. For someone so young to be able to become an Earth Fiend General was simply stunning. Everyone was truly shocked by Zhang King and her talent. Some even suspected that she would soon be the one to break the record for being the youngest Duke of the Xia Kingdom. For an Earth Fiend General like her to battle against Lai Luo, who was still in the 10 seal stage. Honestly, Lai Luo was rather worried that if she might whack him to death with a palm, just by accident. Zhang King put away the book, then said in a regretful manner, It seems you don't want to accept my proposal. There's nothing else I can do. Lai Luo was so furious, he was shaking. What the hell is wrong with the world? Why is it so hard for me to annul my engagement? He then turned to stare lifelessly out the carriage window. From the corner of his eyes, he could still catch a glimpse of Zhang King specifically, her dazzlingly exquisite features and her intoxicatingly pure golden eyes. Lai Luo let out a sigh, then said in a much more subdued voice, Big Sister King, we've known each other for years. I know very well that the feelings you have for me are not romantic in nature. What's the point of being engaged when love isn't part of the picture? Zhang King was silent for a moment. Honestly, my first reaction is to say a 17-year-old kid like you shouldn't put on such worldly airs. But I have to admit that you do speak some sense. However, I have no interest in any other men at all. As for you, at least I don't find you repulsive. Lai Luo let out a bitter chuckle. Big Sister King, the main reason you set up this engagement was to show your gratitude to my parents. I'm sure that your feelings towards them are much stronger than any feelings you might have towards me. But I really have no need for this form of gratitude. Lai Luo lowered his head. He said in a slow voice, I know that it isn't going to be easy to get you to annul this engagement, but he raised his head to stare directly into her eyes. I hope that you will give me, and yourself, a chance. Lai Luo paused a moment, then continued. Let's do a trade. I'm not strong enough to manage our house, and so in the interim you have taken over on my behalf. One day, however, I will take back control. If on that day, you are able to return to me a house that is more or less as strong and prosperous as the one you took over, then as my way of showing gratitude, I will grant you freedom from this engagement. Deal. Zhang King did not immediately respond. For a long, silent moment, she tapped her long, slender white fingers on the table in a rhythmic manner. Finally, she said in a soft voice, Lai Luo, Do you really dislike me that much? Luo was startled. He took a deep breath, then said, John King, I think you may have underestimated your attractiveness and your appeal. Your beauty and your charisma is enough to cause anyone of our age to be instantly smitten with you. If I claimed to have no interest in you at all, then I would be lying to both myself as well as to you. But this is not the type of engagement I want or need. John King raised an eyebrow, then suddenly smacked the table with one dainty hand. Crack! The sudden sound jolted Luo, causing him to quickly sidle backwards. Hey, let's keep it civilized. No need to resort to violence. John King rolled her eyes at him, then said calmly, Luo, it's been a while since we've met. Clearly, you've become a bit more eloquent since then. I agree that your words have some merit. Fine, we can treat this as a trade. Once you are ready to assume control over House Lulan, I'll be sure to hand it over in a healthy, intact state. At that time, you can annul our engagement. Luo was speechless, then let out a long sigh. He instantly felt as though he had been relieved of a heavy burden. However, in the deepest part of his heart, he couldn't help but feel a sense of inexplicable loss. He cursed at himself for feeling this. The hell is wrong with you? Your little speech today has caused me to look upon you in a new light. It seems you are no longer a little boy. Luo was irritated. Little boy? There's nothing little about me. John King ignored his words. She gazed at him with an enigmatic half-smile, then continued. But, Luo, I do have to give you a little reminder. Are you absolutely sure you want to enter this deal with me? Once our engagement is off, I suspect that you will never, ever have a chance to get it back. Luo narrowed his eyes, then leaned forward with both hands pressed to the desk and stared directly at John King. Their faces were less than a foot apart. John King, I really have no interest in this type of engagement because in the future, I intend for you to personally hand me an engagement agreement rather than hand my parents one. John King stared right back into Luo's handsome face with her golden eyes, the amusement on her face growing stronger. She knew exactly what Luo meant. The reason why he wanted to annul this marriage agreement was because as of right now, she had no interest in him as a man. If in the future she once more proposed to be engaged to him, it would only be because she had fallen for him. Sit your butt down. Her red lips quivered. Suddenly, an invisible force appeared out of nowhere and pressed Luo back into seat with enough force to cause him to let out an involuntary squawk. Just like that, all of his posturing had been wiped away. John King rested a hand on her fragrant cheeks, then cast Luo a rather lazy look. You don't have a lot of skills, but you sure have a lot of guts. I've encountered many geniuses in recent years, but none of them ever dared to speak to me like this. Luo, don't let your reach exceed your grasp by too much. Your goal is completely unrealistic, but if you really want to give it a shot, I'll give you a chance. Her golden pupils suddenly glowed with a mysterious, inscrutable light. I'll wait for you at the Astral Sage College. This is your first step. If you can't even accomplish this, then let's both just forget about what you said today. We'll chalk it up as being the words of a rebellious youth. This time, Luo didn't interrupt. He leaned back against the carriage window as he slowly closed his eyes. He said in a calm voice, "Then just wait for me there." John King turned her gaze out the window. As she watched their carriage move past the various buildings, a stray ray of sunlight sparkled across her golden eyes. The tiniest of smiles appeared on her face, filled with a rare look of softness. After they had traveled for a long period of time, Luo suddenly opened his eyes. Rather puzzled, he said, "This isn't the way home." John King gently nodded, then said quietly, "We're going to pay a visit to the Golden Dragon Bank. There's something we need to pick up there." She turned her golden gaze towards Luo. "Before Master and Mistress left, they prepared something for you. They said that you were only to open it up after you reached the age of 17. Luo was speechless. His heart shook. "Mom, Dad, you left something behind for me?" Chapter 4: Golden Dragon Bank. Many mighty and influential factions were hidden within the Xia Kingdom, of which 2 were behemoths that held stances of absolute neutrality. These were titans that even officials and the royal family would never dare to aggravate. The first was the renowned Astral Sage College. The second, the Golden Dragon Bank. Attending the Astral Sage College was the aspiration of numerous Xia Kingdom youths. The elites that graduated from there were often courted by the numerous powers of the land. The Golden Dragon Bank, on the other hand, was involved in the trading, safekeeping, and auctioning of all sorts of goods and treasures. Their financial might was so immense that any power would stare at their wealth with reddened eyes. Yet no one dared to even dream of infringing on their interests. The true might of the Golden Dragon Bank far superseded any power in the Xia Kingdom. The branch that existed in the Xia Kingdom was just that, a mere branch. The main branch of the Golden Dragon Bank was located in a place far more vast than the Xia Kingdom, and they had a resounding reputation across the land. This was because the Golden Dragon notes issued by the bank could be redeemed for an equivalent amount of sky gold at any branch. The city of Southwind was the county town of the Chanshu province. It naturally housed its own branch of the Golden Dragon Bank, which was unsurprisingly located in the most luxurious area, the center of the city. As Lai Luo got off the carriage, he gazed at the glorious and dazzling building before him. This was not the first time he had laid eyes on a building so grand, yet he couldn't help but exhale in wonder. Even a branch building in a simple county town exhibited grandeur beyond its humble surroundings. The financial resources of the Golden Dragon Bank were truly unfathomable. Even House Lulan's estate seemed lacking when compared to this behemoth. John King's expression was calm and unperturbed. Upon exiting the carriage, she immediately made his way towards the bank with Lai Luo in tow. After entering this magnificent bank, John King withdrew a golden note from her belongings, which she then passed to an attendant. The note was carefully inspected before the attendant hastily and respectfully ushered the two into a VIP room. Moments later, a beaming, plump, middle-aged man waddled in. He was bedecked with all sorts of glittering jewels, each and every one of his fingers clad with numerous rings. "Ha ha! I am honored to be in the presence of House Lulan's young lord and Miss Jiang. You have truly brought great honor to my humble dwelling." It is important to keep in mind that anyone who could act on behalf of the Golden Dragon Bank would definitely be socially adept. Since the plump man could recognize Lai Luo at a glance, he also understood his current status. Yet he did not slight Lai Luo in the least, and he provided him all due respect, even addressing him first. "This is the supervisor of the Chanshu Province's Golden Dragon Bank, President Lu." Zhang King casually introduced the other party to Lai Luo. "President Lu, do lead us to retrieve the goods." With the brief introductions complete, Zhang King reverted to her usual swift and decisive demeanor. President Lu nodded and smiled, turning to lead the way. The three of them weaved through layers upon layers of restrictions before making their way deep under the building. Following President Lu's lead, the three arrived in front of a completely sealed room with no entrances. Instead, there were smooth, glossy, black stone walls on all sides, making it seem like a room surrounded by black mirrors. President Lu then lightly patted the wall. His actions made the wall split apart, allowing the group to enter the room. A box made of an unknown metal gradually emerged from the ground within the room. President Lu smiled as he explained, "My respected guests, this is the object that the Lord of House Lulan left behind. In his words, the young lord has to retrieve this personally, and his blood will act as the key." With his job complete, he naturally slunk away, leaving the other two in the room. Lai Luo stared at this safety deposit box of sorts, almost in a trance. Just what were his parents up to, leaving him with all this secrecy and mystery? What had they left behind? Yet his intuition was screaming at him, telling him that the object in front of him was of utmost importance. Perhaps it could change his ill fate? He took a deep breath and stepped forward, placing his palm on the strongbox. At this moment, he felt a piercing pain in his finger, as if a drop of blood was forcefully seized from him and absorbed by this strongbox. Click, mechanical clicks could be heard coming from within the strongbox. A faint luster gradually emerged from the center as the strongbox cracked apart. At this point, Lai Luo could finally see what was within. It was a pitch-black crystal ball. It was extremely smooth, so much so that Lai Luo could even see his own reflection. There were clearly some unspoken mysteries surrounding this object. "Just what?" Lai Luo mumbled as he blinked while inspecting the crystal ball. "Let's store it carefully for now. Master said that you had to wait for your 17th birthday before you could retrieve this." Zhang King passed a suitcase over. Lai Luo nodded as he carefully placed the black crystal ball inside the suitcase, tightly holding onto it for dear life as his eyes moistened. "What's wrong?" Zhang King asked with a puzzled expression. "I have a hunch that my lucky break is finally here. I'm so emotional, I could cry," Lai Luo exclaimed as he waved the suitcase towards her. "Just you wait. I'm definitely going to succeed in annulling this marriage." John King couldn't be bothered to respond. She immediately turned around and left the secret room. She could clearly tell that Lailua was surging with excitement and was definitely itching to irritate her. The two left the depths of the building and were once again greeted by President Liu. This time, he was accompanied by a young lady. She was garbed in green and was exceptionally beautiful, with an elegant and exquisite charm to her. Her fine, black hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall, reaching her willowy waist. This was coupled with a set of captivating eyes that shone brightly. Her snow-white skin gave off a crystal-like sheen. She was eye-catching, the very embodiment of perfection. Even though her hands were clad in thin, silk gloves, one could faintly make out her slender, jade-like fingers. If she ever removed those gloves, there would be people drooling at the sight of her ephemeral beauty. Possessing both beauty and temperament, this young lady was clearly a level above Difa King. Upon seeing her, an unnatural expression flashed across Lai Luo's face before he regained his composure. "Haha, this is my little niece, Lu Kinger. She has just been accepted into Southwind Academy as a cultivator, and she absolutely idolizes Miss Zhang. When she heard you were here, she was adamant in coming along. I do hope that Miss Zhang will not take offense to this," President Liu explained as he clasped his hands respectfully with a smile on his face. "Greetings, Senior Sister Zhang," Lu Kinger said with deference as she graciously curtsied. Zhang King began to size up this new arrival with perfectly symmetrical features. "Since you're a student of Southwind Academy, I suppose you're acquaintances with Lai Luo?" Lu Kinger shifted her gaze momentarily to glance at Lai Luo, who was standing by Zhang King's side. She beamed as she gently nodded, her deep gaze captivating all. "Lai Luo used to provide me with some pointers, and I've always been thankful to him. However, it seems like in these past 2 years, he hasn't wanted to meet me." Lai Luo let out an awkward smile as he hastily and laughingly replied, "No, no, 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 please don't jump to conclusions. We are in different schools, so it's been very difficult to come see you." Deep down, Lai Luo felt helpless. Lu Kinger was exceptionally famous in Southwind Academy. She was in a completely different strata compared to Difa King. Not only was she attractive, she was the poster girl for Southwind Academy, being the #1 talent in the current generation. When Lai Luo was still attending the first school, many of the students had yet to open their resonant palaces. With his exceptional ability to utilize resonance arts, he was a cut above the rest of the students. Hence, numerous students would approach him for guidance, including Lu Kinger. Therefore, they could be considered close friends. Then came Lai Luo's misfortune of blank palaces and his subsequent booting from the first school into the second school. As a result, their interactions became sparse. Of course, the most important point here was that Lai Luo spent his time hiding from Lu Kinger. It wasn't because he hated her, but because he felt embarrassed whenever they met. He used to be #1 in the first school, and yet he had been supplanted by her. Who would have thought that they would meet each other again? Lu Kinger did not rebut Lai Luo's clearly perfunctory words, but didn't say anything else either. Instead, she turned her attention to Zhang King and began to chat with her with a casual smile on her face. The Lu duo then proceeded to escort the two out of the bank. "Miss Zhang, I've heard that there will be an event happening in House Lulan," President Liu said with his usual, smiley demeanor. Zhang King's expression was unchanging as she replied flatly, "President Liu is perceptive indeed." "Ah, such a pity," President Liu sighed before continuing. "Do look for me if there is anything I can assist you with. The Golden Dragon Bank believes that harmony breeds wealth." Lai Luo held some doubts in his mind, but he did not voice them. He simply followed Zhang King onto the carriage, and they swiftly left. Meanwhile, President Liu rubbed the chin of his oily, portly face as he glimpsed at Lu Kinger, only to realize that she was still staring wistfully at the direction of the departing carriage with her sparkling eyes. "Cough," President Liu interrupted her. "You little girl, you wouldn't happen to have feelings for Lai Luo, would you?" Lu Kinger batted a glance towards President Liu as she gently replied, "I only feel pity towards Lai Luo. In the past, he did guide me in the resonance arts. I merely feel appreciation towards him. If not for his blank palaces, he would have been my greatest rival in Southwind Academy." President Liu patted his chest as he released a sigh of relief. "Thank goodness, that's great. Kinger, oh, Kinger, he is already an engaged man. Don't try scoring when there's a goalkeeper. With your status and looks, just which youth in the Xia Kingdom could be your match?" Lu Kinger shook her head and then turned around to walk away, ignoring her second uncle's inane ramblings whilst he chuckled and continued to rub his chin. Chapter 5. Senior Pei Hao. After leaving the Golden Dragon Bank, John King was silent within the carriage. Lai Luo followed suit and spoke nary a word, only clutching the suitcase. Who knew what he was thinking? Eventually, they arrived in front of a manor, within which dotted numerous undulating hills and magnificent pavilions, an awe-inspiring sight. This was where Lai Luo's parents had constructed the family home of House Lulan. The four bestial lion horses stopped gracefully in front of the gates, and then the duo exited the carriage. This place seems to have become a lot colder and lifeless. Joan King sighed as she stared at the manor. Back when Lai Luo's parents were still around, this was the administrative epicenter of House Lulan. The bustling activity as people hurried about then greatly contrasted against the decrepit silence seen now. House Lulan's headquarters has long shifted to Xia City. This is just an old manor. I suppose this peace and quiet is expected. Lai Luo smiled. Whilst the two spoke, some individuals approached the entrance to usher them in. At the fore was an old man, with a lady right behind him. The old man had a gentle and amiable expression. The lady, on the other hand, wore a face of makeup that accentuated her maturity, providing an attractive countenance. What was most outstanding was her well-rounded figure. Her twin peaks were well endowed, much like two completely ripe peaches, a sight that would slay men as they swayed gently. "Uncle Liu," Lai Luo cried as he ran towards the old man. He was someone who had followed Lai Luo's parents long ago. Nowadays, he stayed to maintain the estate whilst taking care of Lai Luo. Yet Lai Luo did not recognize this well-endowed lady, and doubts began to arise in his mind. "Uncle Liu, it has been a long time," Zhong King said as she nodded her head before introducing the lady to Lai Luo. "This is elder sister Kai Wai, my assistant in Xia City. She has been helping me to arrange the numerous affairs of House Lulan." "Greeting, young lord," the mature beauty Kai Wai said with a smiling expression as her eyes sized Lai Luo up. Lai Luo nodded in reply. "It must have been hard on you, elder sister Kai Wai." Elder sister Kai Wai will be staying in the city of Southwind for a period of time. She will be taking care of House Lulan's affairs in the Chanshu province and will be directly reporting to you in all matters, John King explained. Lai Luo was momentarily shocked. Ever since House Lulan's headquarters relocated to Xia City, nothing much had cropped up within the Chanshu province, and things had been stable since then. Now, in the blink of an eye, why had Sister King suddenly deployed such a capable individual to assume control of the situation? Has something happened? Lai Luo queried as he sighed deeply. John King's sudden return was clearly unrelated to his upcoming 17th birthday tomorrow. John King paused in deep thought. Her usual, exquisite expression had turned cold as she strode towards the interior of the manor, Lai Luo trailing right behind her. "Although you've been left in the city of Southwind, I suppose you have not heard of the news surrounding House Lulan. I did not speak of these things for fear of affecting you." As they walked on the light gravel road, scattered light filtered through the leaves of the surrounding trees, bathing their path with warmth, contrasting against John King's direct and cold words. Lai Luo nodded. Although he did not take part in House Lulan's affairs, even a blockhead could guess that with the absence of his parents, House Lulan would be faced with turbulent winds. Starting a house within the Xia Kingdom was not such a simple task. The most important rule was that one had to have a duke. Within the Xia Kingdom were 5 great houses, and House Lulan was one of them. Out of these 5, House Lulan had the shortest history and had also risen the most abruptly. This was due to both of Lai Luo's parents entering the duke stage. Mysterious Young Duke, Lai Taixuan. Misty Duke, Tan Tailan. A house with 2 dukes. This was the key reason why House Lulan had catapulted into the ranks of the 5 great houses so quickly. Whilst the rest of the 5 great houses had long established histories, House Lulan was a complete upstart. As a result, this also meant that they had less of a foundation and barely any assets to speak of, and were thus weaker than the other 4 by a fair margin. This was originally not an issue, as Lai Taixuan and Tan Tailan's abilities were more than sufficient to cover this gap during this time. Hence, it was a pity that they both had disappeared. Losing their 2 main pillars of support, House Lulan's strength declined rapidly. At the onset of their disappearance, their reputations still served to deter any unsavory intentions. However, with the passage of time, the lack of news regarding Lai Taixuan and Tan Tailan had ended up birthing rumors that they had met their demise in the Nobles' War. House Lulan, as one of the 5 great houses, had numerous businesses under them. This was undoubtedly a fat, succulent piece of meat for any power within the Xia kingdom. Numerous factions had been eyeing it covetously, drooling at the mouths for a potential bite. Thus, with the passage of time, Lai Taixuan and Tan Tailan's inheritance had been gradually whittled down. A few wolves could barely resist the temptation in these past few years and had taken quite a few mouthfuls. With such a situation afoot, Jiang King had to put pause to her studies in the Astral Sage College to take over the affairs of House Lulan. As a result, her reputation in the Xia kingdom had soared. Unfortunately, she had yet to enter the Duke stage, so her strength was insufficient to deter this pack of hungry wolves. In this dire situation, she had chosen to give up some of the businesses, opting to recover them when the house had recouped its strength. By showing little resistance, it signaled to the wider world that the situation within House Lulan was terribly unstable, battered by the oncoming winds. Lai Luo understood very clearly at this point that without sufficient strength, trying to guard a mountain of gold would only bring trouble to oneself. Patiently enduring was the sensible long-term strategy. I've heard of House Lulan's decline in these few years. Perhaps things have begun to stabilize? Lai Luo asked curiously. Jiang King pursed her lips as she calmly replied, "External pressure has temporarily reduced. However, the problem now lies within House Lulan's headquarters." Lai Luo was dumbfounded for a second before he slowly asked, "Is it due to Senior Pei Hao?" Kai Wai stared at Lai Luo with a flabbergasted expression. "Although Sister King has not been in charge of House Lulan for long, your charm is unparalleled and your strength within the house is not insignificant. The only member of House Lulan who can compete with you is that senior disciple my parents took in." Lai Luo smiled as he explained his deduction. Pei Hao was a wandering vagrant in his youth. He had offended an enemy and would have been executed if not for the lucky intervention of Lai Luo's parents. Seeing how pitiful he was, they accepted him into House Lulan and his talents were gradually unearthed, demonstrating his genius. When House Lulan officially made their mark, he was officially taken in as a disciple. With this background, Pei Hao's position in House Lulan soared into the heavens, and by the time of Lai Luo's parents' disappearance, he had already accumulated quite a bit of power. When his parents were still around, Senior Pei Hao would often come to interact with Lai Luo. Over the years, these interactions had gradually become more rare, especially after it was discovered that Lai Luo had blank palaces. It was clear that Senior Pei Hao wasn't a very genuine person. Pei Hao has always objected to my control of House Lulan. He has also acted arbitrarily when it came to decisions regarding the house. His influence within House Lulan is not minor. At least half of the Inner Council of Nine supports him. This has brought about some unsavory influences on the situation. Frankly speaking, if he was willing to act on behalf of House Lulan, then all of this would be tolerable. If not for Master's orders, I would not have wanted to make a move and take control. Lai Luo nodded in agreement. With Jiang King's personality, she definitely disliked this sort of responsibility. Focusing on cultivation would have been ideal, considering her gratuitous talents. Though in the end, all of these problems had arisen because the young lord just wasn't up to par. Both of them understood that with his current predicament of possessing blank palaces, he was helpless in such a situation. If they passed control to him, it would more or less spell doom for everything his parents had toiled for. Furthermore, in this world, might made right. "It must have been hard on you, Sister King," Lai Luo sincerely said from the depths of his heart. Jiang King shook her head. "No need for this display. We are already engaged, and I'm also part of House Lulan, in case you already forgot and need a beating to remind yourself," she replied bluntly. Lai Luo was speechless at this retort, whilst Kai Wai laughed while coyly covering her mouth, her appearance capable of moving anyone. Jiang King continued, "Ever since the two masters disappeared, everyone has been on tenterhooks. Although I have done my best to pacify everyone, the situation House Lulan is in is not something that can be resolved easily. Meanwhile, Pei Hao continues to goad and rally the support of the people, constantly seeking to suppress me. I've done some investigating, and I suspect that there are greater forces at play, secretly assisting him." Lai Luo reached out to catch a falling leaf before musing. "We seem to have raised a wolf in our home. Pei Hao will bring some men to discuss terms in the city of Southwind tomorrow. If we are unable to come to a consensus, the worst-case scenario is that House Lulan will directly disintegrate and a heavy blow will be dealt to us." Jiang King's golden pupils seemed to become as icy as the cold of winter. Even a trace of killing intent could be seen. Lai Luo raised his eyebrows in puzzlement. House Lulan was surrounded by wolves in the Xia kingdom, and furthermore, there were even more tigers eyeing them from the sidelines. If they did fall apart, House Lulan would be severely weakened, and inevitable troubles would follow. All he could do now was sigh. He was just too weak, unable to